Hello and welcome to the Lean on Agile podcast. I'm your host Shahin, and I have a very special guest today, Gil Broza. I had the privilege of learning from him. We are both from Toronto. Our home base are Toronto, so I have the privilege of knowing him and learning from him much. He has written two books, The Human Side of Agile and The Agile Mindset previously. He recently has written a third book, Agile for Non-Software Teams. So we are going to mainly talk about the book and other topics. But before that, hello, Gil, and
Hi,
thanks for joining us.
my pleasure.
Gil, I wouldn't do the justice introduce you for our audience. Would you please tell our audience who Gil is?
All right, thank you. I was a developer for many years, and then I was an architect and a dev manager. And in the year 2000, I discovered Agile, really before it had the name. And I learned by a lot of trial and error, and loved it. Loved it so much that in 2004, I got into coaching. I became an XP coach at the time when XP also meant the Windows version, and that was, of course, a huge source of confusion. And later rebranded as an Agile coach and trainer, right? And that's what I've been doing for the past 16 years. I've been independent for 11 now, and I work primarily in North America. I love it that there is more and more work in Toronto these days. And I get to be here more and see my family more.
Nice.
Yeah.
I'm subscribed to your newsletter, and by the way, guys, if you are not subscribed, subscribe to Gil's newsletter. We are going to put the link at the end of the show in the show notes. He recently wrote a newsletter about how to work remotely and how to effectively work remotely. Do you mind, before getting into the talk about the book, give us a little bit of tips or tricks on how to do that with all these challenging time that we have in our hands right now?
Yes. I wrote that 2 weeks ago, I think, and it was titled "Preparing for a Work from Home Team." And I was assuming that, people would start working from home a few weeks after my email. And in fact, almost everybody you and I know, right, started working from home, 4 or 5 days later. So really the point of it was not so much, the tooling or, really how to conduct some of the practices remotely. The idea was that, you had a co-located team and all of a sudden they've become distributed. And they're not distributed in the sense that, people asked for this, right? They're not distributed because people try to have really this good, work-life balance or whatever. They're distributed usually in the same city, right? So of course, same time zone and whatever, that makes things easier. But what's not making it easier is that nobody asked for this, and people are home with their kids, just like you and I are right now, right? And all of a sudden, you can't really see them in this type of, easy or straightforward manner as just, walking up to their desk and saying hi, right? You can't really do this. So of course there are alternatives, and we're using technology. You and I are using Zoom. I don't think any of us had an account more than a month ago, right? Everybody's on it, but it's not about the tools. It's about how do we keep the team going as a team. That was the big deal. Right. And if all of a sudden we're dispersed, we're worried, we're stressed out, we can't focus. I mean, I can tell you, past 2 weeks, I can't focus on anything. Right. It's so difficult to concentrate with this huge level of uncertainty.
Right.
That, this to me is really what the human side of Agile means. The fact that you have workers on your team who are otherwise, conscientious and, accountable and friendly and professional. And now they're in a situation where it's really hard to concentrate and keep going as a team. And that was really the point of that newsletter. Our listeners can find it on the website at 3pvantage.com. But really the big deal is to keep checking in with people and, having frequent opportunities, and also respecting the fact that everybody is finding themselves in a situation that they don't know how to deal with, and not, springing accountability on them and expecting your burn downs to look pretty and all of that stuff.
Right.
So for instance, one of the suggestions I made there was to actually not use sprints for the time being, but
Mm-hmm.
to actually move to something that's more of a flow, not as a big, official transition to Kanban, but because it's really next to impossible to commit to anything,
Right.
any lifespan, in any time span, right?
Right.
So instead, just work in priority sequence and just take things as they go.
Right.
And if working from home becomes the new normal, then we'll deal with it then.
Right. Then we figure out what the sprint should look like then.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, of course, you got lots of, good, solid virtual teams and they make it work, but we're not talking about normal virtual teams now.
Right. Yeah.
These are, forced to be virtual.
Yeah. Yeah. True. Thanks for sharing that. And let's get back to the main topic of our talk
Okay.
about your new book. Tell us about your new book. The book has been very highly cited, very highly. I saw one of the Agile Manifesto signatory writer recommendation. David Marquet wrote the foreword for that book.
Yes.
It's a very heavy weighted book. So tell us more about the book.
Okay. So, you and I grew up in software, right? Chances are a lot of our listeners, that's what they do: software, technology, IT, whatever. And we sort of have a good sense of what it's like to run Agile, but it took us a couple decades to figure it out, right? So, like I said earlier, I started in Agile 20 years ago. Nobody knew what it was like. I mean, there were a few people to learn from. And now, if you look outside of software, if you look at business functions, support functions, facilities, HR, marketing, business units, all sorts of business-specific departments, there's a lot of interest in Agile, but they don't know how to start. They don't know what it might look like. They don't know how to, proceed along the journey in ways that would actually be helpful to them, as opposed to copied from software. And software is very specific, right? It has constraints and it has complexities and it has parameters and economics that are unlike most other pursuits in a business. And so copying what sometimes works in software over to, let's say, HR doesn't really make a lot of sense. So what I wanted to do is, to help people in that situation where you have, I don't know, head of HR, a director of marketing, the facilities manager, or also simply, again, business-specific departments to say, okay, we want Agile. How do we go about it? What would it look like for us? And like I did in the two previous books, without prescribing solutions.
Right. Wouldn't be as easy as I saw some people, I don't call them coaches, but some people in Agile world, they change the software in the Agile manifesto to solutions or to inventions or innovations. And then they call, this is your manifesto or Agile manifesto for a non-software team. Isn't that as easy as that?
Well, okay, it depends on which level you look at, right? So when we talk about an agile way of working, we're talking about both mindset and tactics, right? So the mindset is the choices you make, and the tactics are what you actually do, right? Those tools and practices and processes and whatnot. When you look at the mindset, one of the things is, what do we care about and optimize for? And in software, we want working software frequently, right? Mm-hmm. We want to ship something that makes a difference on a regular basis, hopefully frequently. The same concept applies outside of software. It's something you want to optimize for. You want to deliver to your consumers, whoever they happen to be, solutions that help them accomplish their purpose. Now, a lot of the variety will happen at the level of the tactics, right? So in software, we know, okay, it means such things as having good, automated test coverage and writing small things and deploying frequently to production and automated pipelines and blah, 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 right? But when you talk about something like marketing or sales, there's not much by way of automated testing that you can do. What you consider a pipeline would look totally different. So how can you accomplish that same objective in a different context is really the question.
would the software organization has gone through the same thing, that the tactics were not easy for them at the start for the agile transformation?
Mm-hmm.
Like maybe like 15 years ago, it wasn't as easy as having a pipeline for going to production.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the wave that you are seeing in, for example, in marketing, that the tactics for that award is not easy. Because I was reading your book and you were talking about purpose, mindset, and tactics.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, the mindset was the hardest part to tackle. But now that you're talking about, I'm looking more outside of the software. I
Mm-hmm.
think tactics might be harder for them first rather than the mindset to tackle.
Well, that really depends on the field that you're in, right? So outside of software, marketing seems to be the area where people really take on to Agile more than in any other field. So they're figuring out tactics, right? And you can do all sorts of things with the, campaigns and testing and so on. But there are other fields where some of the tactics might be simply a lot easier. Okay, so the tactics will be, I think, will be quite different no matter what field you're in.
Mm-hmm.
And will they be harder than the mindset? Not necessarily. I think part of the challenge we had with going to mindset in software development was that it was not even a subject of conversation, right?
Mm-hmm.
We for many years, the idea was practice it, take the practices, you'll be fine. Shuhari, right?
Right.
Everybody will be saved. Well, no, right? So the matter, okay, look, I wrote the mindset book in 2015 because there hadn't been a book on the agile mindset. People said, well, you should operate in an agile way, but what is that? Right? It was never a subject of conversation, right? You would read books, for instance, and there might be, several pages that kind of say, yeah, we want to, be collaborative and we want to be self-organizing and this and that, but that was it.
Right.
So what I'm suggesting in the book is, identify where you want to start, identify what you want to optimize for, what sort of assumptions you're making, and then choose principles that fit for it. So this is actually mindset first, right? Based on the mindset, then you figure out tactics. People are smart enough. They can do this. It's not like, having a demo every 2 weeks is somehow, cosmically right. It's not.
Right. In the first chapter of your book, I read a sentence called "healthy teams that delight customers."
Yes.
And I guess you were talking about, and I was like, oh my God, if like no matter what environment you are in, if you are focusing on building healthy teams that delight the customers that you're in that field, you are capturing the essence of what agile or whatever your end goal is to be. So is that, if someone wants to become more effective at what they do, even though they don't know what agile is, if they focus on healthy teams that delight customers, is that the golden nugget? Is that it's not easy to find the balance between healthy teams in your organizations and that delight customers.
Right. But it's definitely a great start, right? So, what I suggest in the book is definitely guided by the value system that was put forward in the Agile Manifesto. It's not the only set of values that make sense, right? So we have lots of, other suggestions out there for instance, Modern Agile, that's another set of 4 values that is not identical to the manifesto, but it's congruent with it, right? It makes sense. It gives you agility. So you have that. One thing that does run through all this, and you're right, is the intense focus on teams, and not just any teams that are really tight, teams that are really customer focused, teams that approach things gradually, right? Teams where people actually do have each other's backs. This type of construct, this type of team, I would say that, maybe one organization in 100 actually has it right now. So imagine if they built that, right? In software, it's sort of picking up, but even there, it's not quite that, right? A lot of teams are glorified groups. They're not really teams. And even when teams are really being teams, they're not necessarily being great teams. And a lot of times, it's not their fault. It's because the organization around them it rewards and it suppresses certain things that simply force the situation.
Right. Do you want to give us a definition between a team and group for the audience that might not know that? When we
Okay.
talk, yeah.
Well, so a group is just what it sounds like, right? It's a set of people, right? And a team, they have a shared purpose. They have complementary skills, right?
Right.
They're mutually accountable, things like that. And it's funny, in a lot of my leadership courses, I actually have to make this type of distinction because a lot of my attendees are not aware of the distinction. And when I make that distinction, sometimes say, "Oh, I didn't realize that we use the word, but it's not really it. What we have is a group." I mean, you can have a team that has specialists, right?
Right.
But how those specialists show up and how they interact and the sort of responsibility they take for, making a difference, that will make a difference between a team or a group, right? Even the matter of the shared purpose, that is something that a lot of people get confused over. So, 25 years ago when I was a developer someplace, I was a member of a dev team, but we were not a team. We did not put anything in production. We couldn't. All we could do is go as far as works on my machine, it goes to test. And testers will then decide and so on. But we use the word team.
Right.
Okay. So we didn't really have that type of, responsibility for the big picture. We didn't even have mutual accountability. I had a certain set of things I was responsible for, and the other guy had a set of things that he was responsible for, and so on and so forth. And if one of them had a problem, it was not my problem. But in a team, somebody has a problem, it's the entire team's problem.
True. The reason that I asked for this distinction was that in one of your pages of the book, you mentioned after you find your way, then listen to your team. You didn't mention that to listen to an individual or the highest paid person in the room or the leaders or no one else but the team. So tell us more about that. Why did you recommend that?
Okay, so the book is written for a manager, not for a team member, because my assumption right now in this decade is that these are the people who are going to be reading it and who are going to try to put agility in. Okay, software is different. Now you will have team members say, "Hey, I heard about this, let's try it." But outside of it, not so yet. But I don't want the manager inflicting agile on people. There's a lot of talk in the agile community about mandated agile by invitation, open space, things like that. And even before all of this talk, it has never been my experience that inflected agile has a good track record. Right? When a manager goes to a team member and says, "Look, we're going to be using agile. Here's what it's going to look like." A lot of people will kind of take this lying down because, well, the manager, right? There's a power differential, right? They're there under contract, employment or contract, whatever, right? They have to do this. But the question is, will they want to? And if they don't want to, what's the downside? And typically the downside is that people don't actually bring their best self to work. They don't try hard. They just say, "Okay, so fine, I'll do the work, whatever. I'll show up to the meetings. I'll bring the laptop. I won't pay attention. I'll just go through the motions because you told me to." And, nobody wants that, right? Not the manager, not the individual, not the company. So what we know is that when the individuals are involved in choosing how they work, the results are better. The results are not necessarily better because those people are professionals in work method design. They're usually not, but they care. And once they care and they're willing and interested to say, "Okay, I was part of this. I'm going to try to make it work. We were part of making this design. We're going to try to make it work." Then you can get some more mutual accountability. We see this effect when teams do self-selection, right? So it's no different.
Right. If I understood this correctly, your recommendation would be for the manager to read the book, understand what the agile for non-software team should look like, then present it to the team and get their feedback? And no?
No. Actually, the lesson to the team is chapter 3, so it's pretty early on,
Right.
right? The book is written kind of chronologically along the Agile journey, and so the first chapter is just what is it, why do ways of working matter, right? And
Right.
why there doesn't have to be just one. And the second one is, okay, what's special about Agile? And the idea is that all the manager needs to do is read these two chapters and say, okay, I was thinking about Agile because I saw, my IT colleagues, they stand up every day and they got stickies on the wall. I guess that's useful. And those chapters help, up level the understanding to, okay, what is Agile really about? And once, the reader says, you know what, yeah, I'm interested, go with that to the team. So they
Right.
don't know what their Agile will look like yet.
Right.
They don't know, and they won't okay, all the guidance I give in terms of actually designing a method is like in chapter 8.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, so the idea is that you have this early conversation of, team, there's another option to getting our work done. This option has a name, or maybe you don't use the name if some people have been burned. And here are some things about it that make it different. Here are areas where it has, made a good difference. We have other parts of the company that have been using it and they seem to like it. Going there wasn't easy. What do you think? As simple as that.
And you brought up the chapter 8 because I really enjoyed reading that part.
Okay.
Basically, we are bouncing back between chapters, but since we brought it up, you're teaching basically how to design your own Scrum or your own Agile. I don't remember when.
Way of working. Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely not designing your Scrum.
Yeah.
And so this is nothing against Scrum, but Scrum
Right.
is a very specific choice of starting.
Right.
Okay. And I can tell you from all the interviews I've done for the book, and I've done several dozen interviews with people who have tried Agile outside of software, some successfully, some not. The few who picked Scrum changed it beyond recognition. So my assumption is, like we said earlier, is that, once the thing is kind of settled, it will be your own. It doesn't have to mimic anybody's recommendation.
Right.
And so if you want a way of working that is Agile, then you start again with, values and principles, and now you design it. And what you're saying is, in chapter 8, we talk about, what should your way of working describe or attend to in order for it to just be useful and effective.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I use the Scrum as an example. I didn't mean to design your customize Scrum, because some of the people doing that, they go to an organization, and you mentioned that don't start with frameworks or tools. Start. I don't remember which chapter was it, but you said learn enough about the Agile principles, and you gave some examples. Learn about visualization, about feedback, about cost of change, and try to make it less as possible, and then team autonomy, collaboration, all those, right? First, when I saw the chapter title, learn enough about the Agile principle, I'm like, how much enough is enough? And that was my question to you. How much enough is enough?
Okay, so that was a huge question for me when I wrote the book, right? Because I didn't want to rewrite my previous book, and I didn't want to turn people off. This particular one is intentionally 200 pages, so people actually do read it, and I had to pick what is enough.
Right.
And so what I picked are, you just gave a few examples of what I picked. I had to choose what I considered was the bare minimum, so that what you have is in fact Agile minded, right? And not, just, a mix and match type of thing. Right. So, just for our listeners, I'm just going to read out the section headings, like what is enough about the Agile principles. So why we should organize people around value creation, collaborating on product, service, or solutions, the matter of outcomes with value, always working on what's most important, feedback, cost of change, constraining intake, right? So not doing too much at the same time, visualizing the work, breaking it down, team autonomy, self-organization, and collaboration. To me, this set was enough so that once you kind of understand those principles, and a lot of them are not rocket science, but they're just not common. Once you understand this, you can say, okay, now I get this. Now I get this. I can see that in order to be agile, I need to do these things. How I do them? Well, there are some suggestions later, but that's it.
Right.
Look, I want my readers to own the results. I want them, and I believe that they can design their methods without being process experts, right? I mean, I'm a process expert. I would love to be hired to help you out with this, and if you want to, I'll come in and help you. But I think people are capable of, doing something totally reasonable on their own, okay? And they shouldn't have to, just turn to, experts to kind of hold their hands.
Right. And again, going back before this chapter, you talked about a lot about how to pick your agile and when to start agile in your organization. Yes. So tell us more about that.
Right. So one of the first things to do is to determine where you'll start, where you'll try it for the first time. And what does that mean? If you think about pretty much all the agile literature, it doesn't say anything like that, because the typical software team has a single product which they work on for a good period of time until they move on to another product or the next version. It's several people, and the work is by and large development. You will have some occasional things such as, bug fixes and maintenance and whatever, but it's generally development. Okay, and so that's why a lot of the Agile literature is very much about, okay, you bring Agile to your team, you kind of change everything at once, because there is essentially one big target of work. But if you look outside of software, that's usually not the situation. So let's take a finance team, for instance, right? Mm-hmm. They will have some ongoing work, what they might call business as usual or operational or whatever. They might have things that are cyclical, like, reporting and filing, but they might also have projects like, implementing a new tool, right? Or creating new reports or things like that. So those are all different, and you would work on them differently. Some of them need a way of working that is more, predictable, kind of churn things out type of thing, kind of like a basic Kanban, sort of. Whereas, building new reports, that's great for Agile. So the idea is that you look at the kind of work you do, and you find a place or two where you say, let's do this here for the beginning. Learn from that. So we would apply it there. We would, again, choose a few principles, design a way of working. It doesn't take long. And we get started and we practice with this. Okay. If you have a marketing team, for instance, that's marketing both products and the brand, you can say, okay, let's just do this for marketing just one product. Or maybe we have one conference coming up, and nowadays it's virtual, and right, and just try Agile on that one, not on everything.
Right.
Because we want to learn fast, we want to fail fast, because we don't know what we're getting ourselves into, and we also don't want to risk everything. So once you've done that, now you can expand. Now you can expand and do more of the same type, or more teams, or more products, or more solutions, whatever makes sense.
And you talk about the support as well. That I'm not sure if you want to go into detail of the satire change model that you put there, and it's true for any changes that we put there. But with the new, like with the small, for example, the Agile conference that you're trying at, like for the conference that you're trying Agile way of working on it, right? You might get into challenges that you never saw before. You might get into chaos, as you called it, right? And I don't think that without support, you can get through it, right? So my question was to you was that at what level, because we talk about the team and the managers that they have this vision, they're supporting them. What kind of support are we talking here that the team needs?
Right. So, the satire model definitely predicts that as you make a change, some things will become unfamiliar, uncomfortable, up and down, right? That's that whole chaos thing. And the support we're looking at is support from leadership. And that's why there is a portion in the book about, as a manager, prepare to support people in doing this, right? And the point is not so much, clockwork implementation of some agile method, but are people actually acting in an agile way, and do they have a good level of safety? So that's of course something that's mentioned there several times. This applies to any kind of change. You're absolutely right, and this is no different. If you have something that you want to try agile on, the deadline's really close, you don't know what you're doing, uh, this is all brand new, people are maybe a bit nervous, maybe don't start with that one. Maybe make that the second thing you get to, right? Start with something else. So look, even in agile transformations in technology, we don't transform everybody at the same time, regardless of where we are along the timeline, right? We pick a time when people can actually accommodate this, when you have a margin for error, where you have time for learning, and so on, right? That's no different.
Right. You mentioned one thing that really resonates with me. You mentioned finish a small, valuable work together.
Yes.
And I was in my mind, I was comparing that to, I'm sure you heard of it, Sprint Zero, when some people are talking about it, that, in Sprint Zero, we are doing all the groundwork for getting things started, which I'm not a big fan of. And when I read this, it's like finish the small thing that you can work together and it's valuable to deliver, no matter what that is. Like you start working together. Do you want to elaborate on that more?
Yeah, I share your opinion about Sprint Zero, but this is definitely not it. I mean, the idea with the finish small valuable work together, it's a little mantra. It's a little mantra for a team that's just starting out. They don't have the new process memorized, right? Few people feel comfortable really telling you exactly what everything is going to be about in a new process that they just configured. And so my recommendation there, and it's based on things that I've done with software teams as well, is, don't sweat the process, right? Instead, focus on finishing small, valuable work together. Everybody can remember these 5 words, right? So generally work together, look for work that's meaningful, and not just, be busy, and finish it. You start something, finish it. Mm-hmm. Make it so however you want to. If you want to pair up on things, you want to split up. If you want to put stuff on the wall or not, that's okay. Of course, as a coach, I would be thinking of certain things that they could do to make things better. And if I were coaching a team like this, like on a daily basis, let's say as an embedded coach, of course, I would give more and offer more and support more. But my assumption in this book is that those teams are actually not going to get coached.
Right.
Right. So if they need to be self-sufficient, how can you do this? And by the way, that's part of the reason so many teams, they go to Scrum, because Scrum has, it's documented, right? You can say, okay, we are going to do this, and it tells us to do A, B, C, D. Okay, fine. You can come up with your own thing, but it's still the matter of, this is new to people, right? And the manager in question probably doesn't know what it should look like either, right?
Yeah,
so
true.
Design something of your own, make it small, try it out, put it through its paces, see how it plays out, right? Which, by the way, is no different than what most people do in their personal lives when they pick up something new that they haven't done before.
Yeah,
Try a little and they see. That's all we're saying.
Yeah. 2 other things that I really enjoyed. One was about the lead intentionally. When you talked about in detail about what that means. And it was in my mind, I was comparing that with the servant leadership that sometimes people are talking about it, right? But in the support time, it's not about being a servant leader mostly, but it was like focus on these areas that you mentioned. For example, focus on works, not workers, right?
Yes.
Focus on looking at the system and not the people in the system. If there's any challenges coming up, and if you want to set behavioral expectations, right?
Yeah.
Do you want to tell us more about this lead intentionally? Because I really enjoyed that part.
Yeah. So servant leadership is one form of leadership, There's host leadership, there's command and control, there's all kinds of leadership / management. The reality is that however you lead, there will be consequences. Some will be great and some will be awful, right? There will be results to what you do. The recommendation there is take some time to think how you want your leadership to be so you get more of the results that you want and less of the results that you don't want, right? So, for instance, I'll give you an example. We're living now in an unusual time, right, with the virus, right? So a lot of people are busy now trying to make that work from home situation happen, and they're doing a bit more of their disaster planning and business continuity planning and whatever. During this time, they'll be talking to their team members, they'll be talking to their peers and colleagues and whatever. Some of their communication will not be intentional. It will be reactive. And when that happens, what people do is they kind of fall back to what they're used to, but also to some of their fears, right? So it is not inconceivable that, some managers in today's situation are being short with their people, right? Because they're stressed out and everything is, going crazy and whatever, and they might be short and they might be more, should I say this? The word that comes to mind is dictatorial. I can't think of another word, but they might be more forceful than they otherwise want to be. What I'm suggesting, and it's not just for unusual times like this, is choose for yourself how you want to come across, how you want to be. If you want to be a servant leader that empowers a team, be intentional about that. Don't just say, yeah, of course, yeah, I'll do this, fine, whatever. And then when a situation arises that's, kind of unusual, you default to other behaviors.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Leading intentionally means that you are thinking about how do I want me to be? How do I want my team to be as a result of my actions? How do I want the company to be as a result of the team's actions? And basically making that your setting. It takes skills and it takes practice, but making that the setting. Right? It's just like, both you and I are parents, right? Some of our intentionality is we want these kids to be independent, and good members of society. That's just how we want it to be.
Right.
Okay. And so as a result, sometimes we pick our battles, right? That's just one little example of that.
Right. And then you were talking about, after all the support and all that in your book, is about how to assess how it's going and then how to expand it. So
yeah.
These days I'm a little bit more working with data and coaching with data. So tell us what are the patterns that you see for assessing how it's going? Is there a set of data that you recommend, or it depends on what the team decides, or depends on what the end goal is?
Yeah, so it's really the last things you said, right? Because look, when we look at software teams and we look at how they assess what's going, that we have a whole slew of metrics, right? We have things from velocity and cycle time to team happiness to delivering to value delivered and so on, and they all measure different things. Okay, so I have this whole section in the book about how metrics are a thorny issue, right? And we know this from 20 years in software that you can game them and they sometimes drive the wrong behaviors and blah blah blah, right? So they're a thorny issue. They're not an obvious one. So what I suggest in the book is something very simple that any reader can do, and it takes maybe 20 minutes. And that is, it's basically two questions. The first one is, how well are we following what we said we would do? And the second one is, how is this helping? Right? So the first question goes to, when we started on this subset of our work, we said we would do, this set of agile principles. And we customized some methods, whatever. But let's look at what we're actually doing now. How does it reflect those principles? as opposed to whatever we had started with, like whatever we had before we started the change. Okay. Basically, this is a qualitative assessment. It's a high, medium, low type of situation of are we doing what we said we would do, and then look at how is this making a difference, right? So in software we would call this value delivered. This is the same thing, and the question basically can be how has this moved a needle? How has this helped our customers? And for many of the readers, the customers are internal. How is this helping our customers get their work done better? That's it.
Right.
That's it. If they ever want to go to more elaborate metrics, I'm sure they would not be using this book. And that's okay. Right? Yeah,
That is a good
because
start.
I just want people to start because, I'm sure you see this also in your own work where, we start a team along, the Agile journey and 2 weeks pass and somebody already wants to measure something. Right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And there's nothing evil about this, but it's also sometimes misguided.
Yeah.
Right? Because we can usually tell if we're being agile or not, right? We don't necessarily need the number. Okay. If we're not being agile, well, okay, maybe we should do something about this. If we are and it's working out, good. Let's try this another cycle. Still are. Okay, now let's see if we can measure and improve, such as cycle time.
In this book, what I really enjoyed was the combination of different philosophies of Agile, Lean, Kanban. Like, you brought many of these things together and put them in a very nice way for people to understand them and use them. Do you want to talk about a little bit about Lean, Agile, and how these two things work in hand? Because in your book you mentioned that Lean is an ancestor of Agile, and after all, this is a Lean and Agile show. I had to ask you this question.
Okay. Well, Lean is also an ancestor of Kanban, although
Right.
nowadays they're kind of moving apart. Anyway, like every good idea that starts taking on the world, it kind of mutates and has followers and camps and whatever. And I did not want my reader to fall into the trap of, I have to choose. One expert told me this and the other expert told me that. And this is certified and that one is certified, but they don't agree. So now what do I do? Right? I don't want people to do any, to suffer any of that. Right? And that's why what I present there is a more of a holistic view of, agility as informed by, really good ideas from Agile, Lean, Kanban, and so on. Look, as far as Lean and Agile go, the way I look at it is they have somewhat different mindsets, right? So the Lean mindset is a bit different from the Agile mindset, and it's true that one kind of gave birth to the other, but of course they've changed over time. Right. When you look at Lean, Lean really values deliver fast and have a human-centered environment that creates that. Agile takes this a step further and says, but what if we don't quite know what right is? Right? So in Lean, Lean was great for manufacturing because you know what you're building and you want to build it with minimal waste. You want to do it repeatably with minimal variety, right? And you want more of the thing. Awesome for that, okay? But Agile says, well, what if there is variety? What if we don't know what the right answer is? Okay. And when you don't know what the right answer is, because it is mostly because it's subjective and the market's changing and right, all those things, you would want to work differently. Cutting out waste is not the first thing you should do. Right. So now you have Kanban, for instance, that says, okay, well, we kind of know what we're doing, but there is variability in what comes into the process. So it's sort of midway. Right. So you have these situations where, and that's where, again, the values and beliefs come in, where you say, in this situation, we have the answers up front. Predictability matters. Controlling costs and schedules matters, right? And we're in a situation where we can afford to do this. We have to, and it's legitimate. We can get all the answers up front. In that situation, you do one thing. The book will help you with that as well. Whether it's this situation or the opposite, where you're saying, well, we don't have the answers up front. We don't know how people would respond. Again, marketing could be an example of that. So when I refer to these things as values and beliefs, basically what I'm saying is, as a team, be explicit about what you think will help you succeed and what you're taking for granted about your situation. How you label them, if one configuration looks more like lean and the other one looks more like agile, or a third one looks more like, I don't know, like lean startup, doesn't matter.
Yeah.
I don't know that all this tagging is useful.
Yeah. I'm on that side with you as well. And last but not least, you talk about small a agility or a small a agile
Mm-hmm.
versus a big agile, which talks to what you just mentioned about these big tag names
Yes.
in your book. And I guess what I really enjoyed about what you talked about in your book about the small a agile was that it's not for the development or for product, but it's more like what we call it business agility, or that's what is wrapped around these days.
Yeah.
So if we go to the core of agile, it's about the whole process, not only on the tech side or the development side.
Right. And look, we started in technology. It's been 20 years there. It's not that it has not happened outside of technology, but relatively speaking, it's very little. Now that we understand this and we've been practicing with what must be the hardest problem ever, presumably now we can expand this to others and share our lessons, which is really what I try to do here.
Right.
Yeah.
Gil, you mentioned that you have done many interviews for this book, and you put some of them in the book. Were there any surprises, or were there any aha moments from those interviews that you want to share with us?
I was surprised to see that most of the attempts at non-software agile came from Europe.
Oh,
and not from North America. Maybe that's just my sample size, but I don't know. I mean, I'm pretty well connected to the Agile community. When I put out a request for, please connect me to people who I can interview, I got so many responses, and they were mostly from Europe. Here, well, we're in Canada, but let's say, US and Canada, I see this primarily in marketing, but, in Europe, it's been also in other places. Other ahas, I would say that, yeah, the variety of implementations was pretty remarkable.
mm-hmm.
And I think it was more than half the teams that really tried to just do Scrum and very quickly moved away from it.
Oh, okay.
I mean, for various reasons, right? But you can still have perfect agility without necessarily having a specific structure, right? Your structure can be your own. Yeah.
Does that was the reasoning behind when you talk about designing? You mentioned designing your workflow, and you didn't focus much on the process.
Well, that actually that came from one of my clients where they said, process here is a bad word.
Mm-hmm.
Process for us means tell me what to do, I'll do it, and you'll approve it. Okay. And, process for technologists, it probably has a different meaning, right? So if I talk to, a software person, talking about process makes perfect sense. But I was going to assume that this was not the case outside of software. And I think the word workflow is more neutral, has less baggage.
Well, hopefully it stays that way.
I know it's so hard to find words that don't have baggage, right?
Right.
Like velocity. I tell my teams not to use that word, right? Because it communicates so many wrong things about Agile. But it's hard to find an alternative. By the way, the alternative I use is capacity. Yeah.
Thank you, Gil, for your time. I really enjoyed the time and the book that I read. Is there anything else that you want to share with our audience before saying goodbye to you?
Um, Anybody who who chooses to read this book and act on it, I would love to have a conversation with you. No strings attached. I want to help out. For me, helping the world with Agile is the best job ever. So if I can do more of it and help more people, I would love to.
Thank you, Gil. It was a true pleasure to have you on the podcast.
Thank you.